For 39 years, Nathan Bailey had trusted his hands more than any machine. At 67, he could hear weakness in steel before younger welders could even see it. But one gray morning at Harbor Crest Shipbuilding, Nathan was called away from his station and told his experience was no longer needed. His badge was deactivated. His tools were boxed. By noon, he was walking through the gates carrying nearly 4 decades of loyalty in a cardboard box. 3 months later, Harbor Crest launched its first vessel built without him. Before sunrise, seawater appeared inside a sealed lower compartment. Then another ship leaked, then a third. Management called it bad luck. Nathan knew steel did not believe in luck. And if you have ever been made to feel replaceable after giving your best years to something, stay with Nathan's story. What happened next proved that experience has a value no company can measure until it is gone. Several weeks before Nathan Bailey walked out of Harbor Crest Shipbuilding for the last time, his days still followed the rhythm he had known for most of his adult life. He woke at 4:45 every morning. By 5:30, he was driving through the dark streets of Norfolk with a thermos of black coffee in the cup holder and an old country station playing softly through the speakers. By 6:00, he was inside the shipyard. Nathan had first entered Harbor Crest when he was 28 years old. Back then, the yard was rougher, louder, and far less forgiving. Welding machines were heavier. Protective equipment was less comfortable. Most calculations were written by hand. A man learned by watching someone more experienced making mistakes, getting burned, and coming back the next morning determined not to repeat them. Nathan had done exactly that. At first, he had been one of dozens of young welders trying to prove themselves. Over time, supervisors began noticing that Nathan had an unusual ability to understand metal. He could watch the behavior of a molten pool and know the amperage needed adjustment. He could hear a change in the arc and recognize contamination. He could examine a cooled seam and sense when something beneath the surface deserved another look. By his 40s, workers had started calling him whenever a difficult section refused to cooperate. By his 50s, engineers sometimes came down from their offices to ask his opinion before approving unusual repairs. Nathan never bragged about any of it. To him, welding was not a performance. It was a responsibility. Every ship leaving Harbor Crest would eventually carry people Nathan would never meet. Deckhands, engineers, families, passengers, men working night shifts in storms hundreds of miles from shore. Nathan often told younger welders, the people trusting that seam won't know your name. That's exactly why you have to care. For most of those 39 years, Margaret Bailey had been the person waiting for him at home. She had married Nathan long before he became the most respected welder in the yard. She understood what Harbor Crest demanded from him: missed dinners, emergency weekend repairs, holiday shifts, burned sleeves, hands that smelled faintly of steel even after washing. There were evenings when Margaret would sit alone at their kitchen table while Nathan called to say a vessel had failed inspection and he would be home after midnight. She complained sometimes, but she understood him better than anyone. Nathan did not stay late because he loved overtime. He stayed because he imagined a ship at sea, miles from help, depending on work hidden beneath paint and insulation. Margaret used to tease him. "You worry about strangers like their family." Nathan would smile. "On the water they are." 3 years before Harbor Crest began its modernization campaign, Margaret suffered a sudden stroke. Nathan had been repairing a fractured support frame when his phone rang. By the time he reached the hospital, she was unconscious. She died the following morning. Nathan never fully recovered from the silence she left behind. Their Norfolk house changed overnight. The kitchen became too quiet. The bedroom felt too large. Her reading glasses remained beside the couch for months because Nathan could not bring himself to move them. After Margaret's death, he did what many people do when grief becomes impossible to confront. He worked more hours, more weekends, more night shifts. Harbor Crest became his refuge. Inside the shipyard, there were alarms, grinders, forklifts, voices, schedules. There was always something that needed fixing, something that required his attention. At home, there was only absence. So Nathan gave the company even more of himself. Then Harbor Crest changed. The transformation began when a private investment group acquired a controlling interest in the shipyard. Shortly afterward, Douglas Whitmore arrived as the new president. Douglas was 51, polished, confident, and rarely seen without an expensive suit beneath his safety vest. During his first company-wide meeting, he stood before hundreds of workers and spoke about the future: efficiency, automation, competitive margins, digital integration, lean production. Nathan listened from the back of the crowd. What he noticed most was what Douglas did not say: craftsmanship, experience, mentorship, safety. Within months, veteran employees began disappearing. Some accepted early retirement packages. Others were told their departments were being reorganized. A few positions simply vanished. Nathan also noticed smaller changes. Inspection windows were shortened. Production targets increased. Supervisors who once had freedom to stop a job were suddenly required to justify every delay. People became nervous about raising problems. Nathan disliked the atmosphere, but he kept working the way he always had. If a weld needed another pass, he did another pass. If something looked wrong, he stopped. If an inspector needed time, Nathan defended that time. Then Ethan Parker appeared beside his station. Ethan was 31, a production engineer with a mechanical engineering degree and a reputation for understanding automated manufacturing systems. He was intelligent, respectful, and eager. Douglas had assigned him to document Nathan's working methods. Nathan assumed the reason was obvious. Knowledge had to be passed on. One morning, Ethan watched Nathan adjust a preheat sequence on a thick section of steel. "The procedure doesn't call for that much," Ethan said. Nathan lifted his visor. The procedure was written for ideal conditions. Ethan looked at the digital temperature readout. "And these aren't ideal." Nathan pointed toward the massive open bay doors. Cold air from the Elizabeth River was moving through the yard. "Steel doesn't care what the procedure expects," Nathan said. "It only cares what's actually happening." Over the following weeks, Nathan explained things Ethan had never encountered in textbooks. Humidity could influence contamination. Plate thickness could alter heat flow. Previous repairs could change residual stress. Steel from two suppliers might technically meet the same specification while behaving slightly differently under the arc. Ethan began taking detailed notes. Nathan encouraged him. He thought he was protecting knowledge that might otherwise disappear when he eventually retired. He had no idea those notes were helping management prepare for a future without him. One Tuesday morning, Nathan arrived before sunrise and immediately heard unfamiliar machinery moving inside Bay 4. He walked past stacked steel plates and stopped. A massive robotic welding cell was being installed less than 50 feet from his station. Orange mechanical arms sat behind protective fencing. Technicians connected control cabinets while engineers studied tablets nearby. Douglas Whitmore stood watching. Nathan approached slowly. Douglas noticed him and smiled. "Beautiful, isn't it?" Nathan looked at the machines. "What are they building the future?" Nathan remained silent. Douglas gestured toward the robotic arms. Consistent speed, repeatable quality, no fatigue, no lost shifts. Ethan stood nearby, visibly uncomfortable. Nathan turned toward him. For the first time, he noticed that Ethan would not meet his eyes. Something cold settled inside Nathan's chest. He looked again at the machine, then at his own scarred hands. Hands that had spent 39 years learning lessons no manual could fully describe. A thought entered his mind that he tried immediately to dismiss. Maybe Ethan had not been sent to learn from him. Maybe Ethan had been sent to capture enough of him that Harbor Crest would no longer believe it needed the man himself. Nathan lowered his welding hood and returned to his station. But for the first time in 39 years, the sound of the shipyard no longer felt like home. 2 weeks after the robotic welding cell arrived, Harbor Crest began cutting steel for the most important contract the shipyard had received in years. The order called for a series of coastal service vessels designed to operate in rough Atlantic conditions. Douglas Whitmore treated the contract as proof that his modernization campaign was working. Completion dates were aggressive, profit margins were carefully calculated, and every department received the same message. Nothing could slow production. Nathan Bailey understood deadlines. He had worked under them for 39 years. But he also understood something Douglas seemed unwilling to accept. The ocean did not care about quarterly reports. Nathan first noticed trouble when the new steel arrived. On paper, everything appeared acceptable. The plates met the required specification, but when Nathan began working with them, their behavior felt different. The heat moved through the thicker sections unevenly. Nathan stopped and checked his equipment. Nothing was wrong. He tried another plate. The same thing happened. Then he examined the new welding wire Harbor Crest had recently purchased from a cheaper supplier. The weld looked clean from several feet away. Nathan leaned closer. Tiny irregularities disturbed the surface. He ground away a small section. His expression hardened. Ethan Parker approached. Problemed. Nathan pointed toward several tiny cavities. Porosity. Ethan crouched beside him. That small is how problems introduce themselves. Nathan asked for samples from another spool. The results were inconsistent. Some welds were acceptable. Others developed microscopic pores under specific combinations of temperature and humidity. That unpredictability concerned him more than a simple defective batch would have. Nathan requested additional testing. By afternoon, Rebecca Collins arrived. Rebecca had managed quality control at Harbor Crest for 11 years. She was not easily alarmed, which was exactly why Nathan trusted her. She examined the samples. You think it's the wire partly? Partly, Nathan tapped the steel plate. This material wants more careful preheat than the procedure gives it, especially where the thick sections meet thinner ones. Rebecca looked toward the production schedule posted nearby. Changing that will slow the line. Nathan met her eyes. Then slow it. Rebecca exhaled. She agreed with him. Douglas did not. The following morning, Nathan, Rebecca, Ethan, and several supervisors were summoned to a production meeting. Douglas stood before a screen displaying completion targets. We're already 6 days behind. Nathan placed his samples on the table. Then we need to become 7 days behind. Several managers looked uncomfortable. Douglas stared at him. Excuse me, Nathan explained the inconsistent wire, the heat behavior, and his concerns about preheating thick hull sections. Douglas listened with folded arms. When Nathan finished, Douglas asked, have any welds failed? Not yet. Have any sections been rejected? Not yet. Then what exactly are we discussing? Nathan paused. A problem before it becomes a failure. Douglas smiled without warmth. We cannot redesign production every time someone has a feeling. It isn't a feeling. Douglas turned toward Ethan. What does engineering say? Ethan hesitated. The procedures technically remain within specification. Douglas nodded. Nathan continued. Technical minimums and safe judgment aren't always the same thing. That sentence changed the room. Douglas's expression tightened. The meeting ended without approval for Nathan's proposed changes. Over the next several days, production accelerated. Nathan watched automated systems lay long, uniform seams with impressive precision. He did not hate the machines. In fact, part of him admired them. A properly programmed robotic arm could maintain travel speed more consistently than any human being. But consistency became dangerous when the conditions themselves changed. Nathan tried explaining that to Ethan. They stood beside a recently welded hull section one afternoon. The robot does exactly what you tell it, Nathan said. That's the advantage, Ethan replied. And the weakness. Ethan frowned. Nathan pointed toward the steel. If everything stays exactly the way you expected, the machine wins. But what happens when this plate holds heat differently? What happens when the temperature drops 20 degrees overnight? What happens when contamination gets into one batch? You adjust the parameters, if you notice. Ethan fell silent. Several days later, Nathan noticed another change. Ultrasonic inspection crews were moving faster, too fast. He found Rebecca beside a newly completed section. "How long did they give you?" Rebecca glanced around before answering. "Half the normal inspection window." Nathan stared at her. Half we've been told to prioritize seams with visible concerns." Nathan's jaw tightened. "The whole reason you use ultrasound is to find what isn't visible." "I know. Then stop the line." Rebecca looked exhausted. "If I stop every section, Douglas will replace me with someone who won't." Nathan understood her fear. He simply could not accept its consequences. The next morning, he inspected a seam produced by the automated cell. From the outside, it was beautiful. Straight, uniform, almost perfect. Nathan ran a gloved finger along the metal. Something bothered him. He could not immediately explain why. "Ethan," the engineer approached. "Get Rebecca. For what I want this scanned." Ethan studied the weld. "It looks perfect." Nathan nodded. "That's what worries me." The ultrasonic technician arrived 20 minutes later. Douglas's production supervisor protested the delay, but Nathan refused to release the section. The first scan showed nothing unusual. The supervisor smirked. Nathan asked them to change the angle. The technician tried again. A faint indication appeared. Nathan leaned toward the screen. "There." Rebecca ordered a more detailed examination. The result silenced everyone. A hidden lack of fusion defect ran beneath part of the seam. Ethan stared at Nathan. "How did you know Nathan looked at the flawless surface?" "I didn't know. But you stopped it. I knew enough to doubt it." That moment changed Ethan. For weeks he had believed Nathan possessed an impressive collection of old techniques. Now he understood something deeper. Nathan's real skill was judgment. Thousands of observations accumulated across 39 years had become instinct. Later that evening, Ethan found Nathan preparing to leave. Can that kind of judgment be programmed? Nathan considered the question. Some of it, and the rest you earn. Nathan picked up his lunchbox. Welding isn't just melting two pieces of metal together, Ethan. You're controlling heat stress, expansion, contraction. Sometimes the mistake you make today doesn't introduce itself until 6 months from now. That night, Nathan sat alone at his kitchen table. Margaret's empty chair remained opposite him. He opened a notebook and began documenting everything he had observed. The steel, the wire, the shortened preheat cycles, the reduced inspection windows, the hidden defect. By midnight, Nathan had written a formal safety report, recommending that several hull sections be re-examined and, where necessary, reworked. The following morning, he delivered it to Rebecca and copied engineering management. Rebecca read it twice. This could delay the contract by weeks. Nathan nodded. "And if I'm wrong, we lose time." Rebecca looked up. "And if you're right?" Nathan glanced through the office window toward the enormous hull taking shape outside. "Then time is the cheapest thing we could lose." The report reached Douglas that afternoon. Instead of stopping production, Douglas forwarded a shortened version to corporate management for review. Nathan did not know that several of his strongest warnings had already been softened. At 4:17 that afternoon, an email appeared in his inbox. Mandatory meeting, Human Resources. Friday, 8:00 a.m. Nathan stared at the screen. 39 years at Harbor Crest had taught him to recognize danger long before it became visible. And something told him that meeting had nothing to do with discussing his report. Friday morning arrived beneath a low gray sky. Nathan Bailey entered Harbor Crest Shipbuilding at 5:52 a.m., just as he had done thousands of times before. He showed his badge at the gate, exchanged a familiar nod with the security guard, and walked toward Bay 4 with his lunchbox in one hand. Nothing appeared different. That somehow made everything worse. At 7:45, Nathan removed his welding helmet and washed his hands. At 7:58, he stood outside Human Resources. When the door opened, Douglas Whitmore was already inside. An HR representative sat beside him with a folder on the table. Nathan immediately understood. Nobody had brought his safety report. "Sit down, Nathan," Douglas said. Nathan remained standing for another second before taking the chair opposite them. The HR representative began reading prepared language about restructuring technological modernization and changing operational requirements. Nathan barely heard her. Then came the sentence that mattered. "Effective today, your current position has been eliminated." Nathan looked at Douglas. "After 39 years. This isn't about your service," Douglas replied. "It's an economic decision." Nathan almost laughed. Instead, he asked, "Why today?" Douglas folded his hands. "The automated welding program has reached operational readiness. Engineering can now manage the remaining variables." Nathan thought of Ethan's notebooks. Months of questions. Temperature adjustments, heat sequences, material behavior. The realization arrived slowly and painfully. "You had Ethan documenting me." Douglas shifted slightly. "We documented production knowledge. My knowledge. Harbor Crest owns its manufacturing processes." Nathan stared at him. There it was. They had not simply replaced him, they had studied him first. 39 years of mistakes, corrections, burns, instincts, observations, and lessons had been reduced to parameters inside a computer. Nathan felt something deeper than anger. He felt harvested. The HR representative pushed a severance document toward him. Nathan did not touch it. "Does Ethan know?" Douglas's silence answered before his words did. "Engineering decisions are not your concern anymore." Across the shipyard, Ethan was reviewing automated welding data when Rebecca Collins approached him. "Did you know what Nathan's gone?" Ethan froze. "What do you mean, gone, terminated, position eliminated?" Ethan stood so quickly his chair rolled backward. "No. They said he was transitioning into technical advisory." Rebecca's expression hardened. "They lied." Ethan headed toward administration, but by the time he reached the hallway, Nathan's meeting was ending. Nathan stepped from the office. Ethan stopped. "Nathan?" Nathan looked at him. For a moment, neither spoke. "I didn't know," Ethan finally said. Nathan studied the younger man's face. He saw genuine shock. That mattered. Not enough to erase the pain, but enough to prevent Nathan from placing blame where it did not belong. "I believe you." Ethan swallowed. "They told me the documentation was for knowledge transfer. It was." Nathan glanced toward Douglas's closed door. "They just forgot to mention who they were transferring it away from." Ethan lowered his eyes. Nathan turned to leave, but Douglas appeared behind him. "Nathan?" Nathan stopped. Douglas held out the severance folder. "You should take this." Nathan accepted it. Then he said quietly, "Those parameters aren't complete." Douglas sighed. "We've discussed this." "No, you've dismissed it." Nathan pointed toward Bay 4. "The system assumes consistent steel, consistent consumables, controlled temperatures. You don't have any of those things every day. Our engineers can make adjustments, if they know when to adjust." Douglas's patience disappeared. This is exactly the mentality we're moving beyond. Modern manufacturing cannot depend on one man's intuition. Nathan stepped closer. "It shouldn't." Douglas seemed surprised. Nathan continued, "You should use the machines. They're good machines. But you're treating judgment like inefficiency." Douglas gave a thin smile. "Machines don't become tired, they don't become emotional, and they don't become more expensive with age." The words landed harder than Nathan expected. For 39 years, he had thought Harbor Crest saw a craftsman. Douglas saw a cost. Nathan nodded once. "Then I hope your machines know when they're wrong." He walked away. Security had already disabled his badge. A guard Nathan had known for 14 years accompanied him to his locker. company policy. Nathan opened the dented metal door. Inside were ordinary pieces of a life: work gloves, safety glasses, an old photograph of Margaret, a coffee mug Malcolm from inspection had given him years earlier, a spare shirt, a small notebook. Nathan placed everything into a cardboard box. His welding helmet did not fit. He carried it separately. As he crossed Bay 4, workers began noticing. Some looked away. Others stopped completely. A young welder named Cody quietly removed his glove and offered Nathan his hand. "Thank you for everything you taught me." Nathan shook it. Another worker did the same. Then another. Most, however, remained where they were. Nathan understood. They had mortgages, children, medical bills. Fear could make decent people silent. He did not hate them for it. He passed the robotic welding cell. Its mechanical arm moved smoothly along a seam, throwing controlled sparks behind protective glass. Nathan watched for several seconds. Then he continued toward the gate. 39 years after entering Harbor Crest as a young man desperate for a chance, Nathan left, carrying his professional life in a cardboard box. That evening, the Norfolk house felt colder than usual. Nathan placed the box on the kitchen table. Margaret's photograph lay on top. He sat opposite the empty chair where she had once eaten dinner. At 6:30, he instinctively looked at the clock. Normally, he would have been coming home. Now there was nowhere to come home from. Saturday was worse. Sunday was worse still. Monday morning, Nathan woke at 4:45 automatically. He dressed halfway before remembering. There was no shift. He sat on the edge of the bed in darkness. For the first time since Margaret died, Harbor Crest could no longer protect him from grief. Her absence seemed to fill every room. Nathan eventually reviewed his finances. The severance package looked respectable on paper, but retirement in Norfolk would be tighter than he had expected. Selling the house became an uncomfortable possibility. While searching through old documents, Nathan found a faded envelope containing property papers. North Carolina. He stopped. Years earlier, he and Margaret had purchased a neglected half-acre property near the Albemarle Sound. There was an old marine repair shed on it and a weathered dock. Margaret had loved the place immediately. One day she had said, standing beside the water, "We'll fix this up." Nathan had laughed. "You planning my retirement already? I'm planning our life after you finally learn Harbor Crest can survive one day without you." The memory hurt now. Margaret had imagined growing old there with him. Instead, the property had remained nearly forgotten after her death. Nathan looked around the silent Norfolk house. Maybe staying here was not loyalty. Maybe it was fear. 3 weeks later, he sold several pieces of furniture, packed his truck, and placed Margaret's photograph carefully behind the passenger seat. His welding equipment went into the bed. His old helmet rested beside a toolbox. Before leaving, Nathan drove past Harbor Crest one final time. From the road, he could see cranes rising above unfinished hulls. For nearly 4 decades, that skyline had defined his life. He felt anger, loss, and something else he could not yet name. Nathan turned south. Hours later, city traffic thinned into long, rural roads bordered by fields, pine trees, and quiet stretches of water. Near sunset, he reached the neglected property Margaret had once called their future. The workshop roof sagged. Weeds covered the yard. The dock leaned toward the dark water. Nathan stepped from the truck. For a moment, disappointment overwhelmed him. Then wind moved across the sound. Nathan closed his eyes. He could almost hear Margaret. "One day we'll fix this up." Nathan opened his eyes again. Harbor Crest had decided his useful years were behind him. Standing before the ruined workshop, Nathan was not yet sure they were wrong. But the next chapter of his life was waiting behind those broken doors. Nathan Bailey woke the first morning in North Carolina to the sound of rain tapping against the bedroom window. For several seconds, he did not remember where he was. Then he saw the unpacked boxes beside the wall and Margaret's photograph resting on an old wooden dresser. The truth returned. Norfolk was behind him. Harbor Crest was behind him. Nathan was 67 years old, unemployed, alone, and living beside a workshop that looked as though one strong storm might finish destroying it. He made coffee and stepped onto the back porch. Beyond the weeds stood the old marine repair shed he and Margaret had purchased years earlier. Time had been merciless. Several roof panels were missing. One window was shattered. Rust covered the hinges, workbenches, and abandoned equipment. Vines crawled over one wall. Beyond it, the dock leaned toward the Albemarle Sound. Nathan remembered the first time Margaret had seen the property. She had ignored every defect. Nathan had pointed toward the damaged roof. Margaret had imagined flowers beneath the windows. Nathan had complained about the rotting dock. Margaret had described drinking coffee there every morning. He had seen repairs. She had seen a future. Now Nathan stood in that future without her. For 3 days he accomplished almost nothing. He unpacked boxes. He drove into town for groceries. He tightened a leaking faucet. Mostly he wandered through the property trying to understand why he had come. At Harbor Crest, every hour had possessed a purpose. Here, nobody needed him at 6 in the morning. Nobody called his name across a fabrication bay. Nobody asked whether a seam could be saved. Nathan had spent decades believing retirement would mean freedom. Instead, uselessness frightened him more than exhaustion ever had. On the 4th morning, he finally entered the repair shed carrying a broom. He swept until dust filled the sunlight. Then he removed rotten boards. He patched one section of roof. He dragged rusted equipment outside. The work was slow, but movement felt better than thinking. By the end of the week, one workbench was usable. Nathan placed his welding helmet on it. He stared at the scratched surface. Douglas Whitmore's words returned. Machines don't become tired. They don't become emotional, and they don't become more expensive with age. Nathan looked at his hands. The knuckles were enlarged. Small scars crossed his fingers. His grip was not as strong as it had been 20 years earlier. Maybe Harbor Crest had simply said aloud what time had already decided. A truck horn interrupted him. Nathan walked outside. A broad-shouldered man in a faded fishing jacket climbed from an old pickup. "Are you Bailey Depends Who's Asking?" The stranger smiled. Darius Coleman. He lowered the tailgate and lifted out a heavy metal bracket. "People in town say you used to weld ships. People in town talk fast. Small town." Darius placed the cracked propeller bracket on the tailgate. "Gate, can you fix this?" Nathan examined it. A fracture ran through one side. "You should replace it. I would if the replacement wasn't back-ordered 3 weeks." Nathan turned the piece over. "You use that boat for work." "Every day I can." Nathan understood immediately. 3 weeks without the boat meant 3 weeks without income. "I can repair it," he said. "But I want to reinforce the other side too." How much? Nathan named a modest price. Darius nodded. "When tomorrow afternoon?" For the first time since leaving Harbor Crest, Nathan prepared his welding equipment for an actual job. The old feeling returned almost immediately. Focus, heat, control. He cleaned the damaged area, prepared the fracture, and studied how the bracket had failed. Nobody was watching a production clock. Nobody was demanding speed. Nathan worked until the repair satisfied him. Then he reinforced the matching stress point. Darius returned the following afternoon. He examined the bracket. "You sure that's mine?" Nathan almost smiled. "Unless somebody brought me another broken one." Darius ran his fingers over the finished repair. "You made it look new. I made it safe. Looking good is extra." 2 days later, Darius returned. Nathan expected another repair. Instead, he brought a bag containing fresh fish. Bracket held perfectly. "You already paid me. This isn't payment." Darius handed him this bag. "It's gratitude." That evening, Nathan cooked one of the fish and ate outside. For once, the silence did not feel quite as heavy. Word traveled. The following week, a farmer arrived with a cracked trailer frame. Then, a retired teacher brought an iron gate hinge. Then came an aluminum fishing boat with a fractured transom. Nathan almost refused that job. It required more equipment and preparation than his half-restored workshop comfortably allowed. Then he looked around. He had tools. He had time. Most importantly, he knew how to solve the problem. He accepted. Gradually, the shed changed. Nathan repaired the electrical system. He installed brighter lights. He rebuilt shelves. Darius helped replace damaged roof panels in exchange for another small boat repair. Customers began calling the place Bailey's Workshop, even though Nathan had never given it a name. One afternoon, Nathan noticed a teenager standing beyond the open doors. The boy disappeared when Nathan looked at him. He returned 2 days later. Then again. Finally, Nathan called out, "You planning to stand there until winter?" The teenager froze. He was thin, perhaps 17, wearing worn sneakers and a dark sweatshirt. "I'm just watching." The boy shrugged. Nathan waited. "My name's Malcolm Hayes." That wasn't the question. Malcolm looked toward the welding table. "I want to know how you do that. Do what make broken things useful again." The words struck Nathan harder than Malcolm could have known. Nathan looked away. "Welding isn't something you learn by staring through a doorway." "Then teach me." "No." Malcolm's expression tightened. "Why not?" "Because it's dangerous. Because you need discipline. Because I'm not running a school." Malcolm left. Nathan assumed that ended it. The next afternoon, Malcolm returned. And the afternoon after that. Darius eventually explained why. Malcolm's father was serving time in prison. His mother worked long hours at a nursing home. The boy had recently begun spending time with older teenagers known for stealing tools and breaking into vacant properties. "He needs something," Darius said. Nathan continued grinding a metal plate. "I'm not responsible for saving him." "No." Darius paused. "But maybe teaching him isn't the same as saving him." That night, Nathan could not sleep. He remembered being 17. His own family had possessed little money. A welder named Frank Donovan had once allowed Nathan to sweep floors in exchange for watching him work. Frank had eventually put a torch in Nathan's hands. Nobody called it mentorship then. It was simply one man deciding another deserved a chance. The next afternoon, Malcolm appeared again. Nathan stepped outside. "I told you no." "I know." "Then why are you here?" Malcolm looked embarrassed. "Because I don't have anywhere better to be." Nathan recognized the honesty. He also recognized the danger hidden inside it. Nathan walked back into the workshop. Malcolm remained outside. Several minutes later, Nathan returned, carrying an old welding helmet. He placed it on the workbench. Malcolm stared at it. "If you come here?" Nathan said, "You come on time." Malcolm nodded immediately. "You listen the first time. You don't touch equipment unless I tell you. You clean before you weld, and you learn why something works before you pretend you know how. I can do that." Nathan pointed toward him. 7 tomorrow morning." Malcolm's eyes widened. "Really 7 means 7, not 7:10. I'll be here." Malcolm hurried away before Nathan could change his mind. The following morning, Nathan unlocked the workshop at 6:40. At 6:52, he heard footsteps. Malcolm was already coming down the gravel path. Nathan looked at the second helmet resting beside his own. Something unfamiliar moved through him. For 39 years, Nathan Bailey had believed his purpose was building ships. Harbor Crest had taken that purpose away. Standing inside a forgotten workshop beside the quiet waters of North Carolina, Nathan began to understand that perhaps his real purpose had never been the ships themselves. Perhaps it was what he knew. And perhaps knowledge became more valuable, not less, when it was given to someone who still needed it. Nathan pushed the second helmet toward Malcolm. "First lesson," he said. Malcolm reached for it eagerly. Nathan stopped his hand. "We don't start with welding." Malcolm looked confused. Nathan handed him a broom. "We start with learning to respect the place where you work." Malcolm stared at the broom, then smiled. Nathan almost smiled back. Outside, morning sunlight spread across the Albemarle Sound. Inside the workshop, something Nathan thought had ended was quietly beginning again. while Nathan Bailey slowly rebuilt his life beside the Albemarle Sound Harbor Crest. Shipbuilding was preparing to celebrate what Douglas Whitmore called the beginning of a new era. The first vessel, constructed almost entirely under the shipyard's automated welding program, stood completed beside the Norfolk waterfront. Its freshly painted hull reflected the morning sunlight. Executives gathered near the dock. Photographers took pictures. Douglas stood before employees and investors with the confidence of a man who believed numbers had already proven him right. "This vessel represents the future of American shipbuilding," he announced. Production time had fallen. Labor costs had been reduced. Automation had increased consistency. Nathan Bailey's name was never mentioned. To Douglas, that omission was intentional. The ship itself was supposed to prove that Harbor Crest had moved beyond men like him. Ethan Parker stood near the engineering team and applauded with everyone else. But he felt no pride. During the weeks since Nathan's dismissal, Ethan had repeatedly reviewed the welding parameters programmed into the robotic systems. Something bothered him. Nathan had made dozens of small adjustments depending on temperature, plate thickness, material batches, and environmental conditions. Many had never reached the final automated procedures. Management had wanted simple rules. Nathan's knowledge had never been simple. Rebecca Collins had her own concerns. Her inspection crews were now expected to clear sections faster than ever. Technicians who requested additional scans were questioned about delays. Rebecca had begun documenting every instruction privately. She no longer trusted the official records. 2 days after the celebration, the new vessel began sea trials. For several hours, everything appeared normal. The engines performed correctly. Navigation systems responded. The hull remained stable. Then a technician inspecting a lower ballast compartment noticed moisture. At first it seemed insignificant. A narrow line of water glistened against painted steel. The technician wiped it away. Minutes later it returned. Rebecca was called. She crouched beside the seam and touched the moisture with one finger. Her stomach tightened. "Get Ethan." Ethan arrived carrying inspection equipment. Douglas followed shortly afterward. "What happened?" Douglas demanded. "We're checking," Rebecca replied. "It's probably a seal." Rebecca ignored him. The first examination revealed no obvious external damage. Ethan studied the structural weld behind the wet area. "Pressure test it." Douglas frowned. "Is that necessary?" "Yes." The compartment was isolated. Testing began. A tiny bead of water emerged directly through the welded joint. Nobody spoke. Ethan moved closer. "That isn't a seal." Rebecca looked at him. "No." Ultrasonic testing revealed a microscopic crack extending through part of the heat-affected zone. Ethan felt cold despite the heat inside the compartment. He had seen Nathan describe this exact possibility: different plate thickness, insufficient preheat, residual stress, a defect invisible from the surface. Douglas stared at the scan. "Repair it." Rebecca turned toward him. "We need to determine why it happened. We know why. A weld failed. That's the result, Douglas, not the cause." Douglas lowered his voice. "This vessel does not leave this trial with a structural defect on its record. Repair it and document it as an isolated fabrication issue." Ethan looked at him. "An isolated issue." "That's what I said." The repair was completed quietly. But 5 days later, Harbor Crest received another call. The second vessel from the same production series had developed moisture along an internal seam during dockside testing. This time, 2 separate areas were affected. Rebecca ordered immediate scans. Both revealed internal cracking. Douglas blamed the welding wire. The supplier denied responsibility. Engineering recalibrated the robotic equipment. Production continued, then the third vessel failed pressure testing before it even left Harbor Crest. Water appeared in 3 compartments. One leak was so obvious that a technician placed a bucket beneath it. Nobody used the word isolated anymore. Within 48 hours, Harbor Crest's largest commercial customer suspended acceptance of all vessels in the series, pending a complete structural review. Penalties began accumulating. Production slowed. Executives who had celebrated the automated program now demanded explanations. Douglas responded by searching for blame. 2 technicians were dismissed for allegedly failing to follow procedure. A shift supervisor was reassigned. Rebecca confronted Douglas in his office. "You're firing people who followed the procedures we gave them. Somebody failed, yes. But you've decided who before determining how." Douglas leaned back. "You should focus on your department." "I am." Rebecca left before her anger cost her the job. Ethan remained late that evening. The engineering office had emptied. He opened the automated procedure database and compared it against his old notes from the months spent beside Nathan. The differences were subtle. Nathan had never treated preheat temperature as one fixed number. He adjusted according to thickness, ambient temperature, and previous heat exposure. The automated program used narrower assumptions. Ethan whispered, "You told us." Then he remembered Nathan's formal safety report. He searched the electronic archive. The executive version appeared first. It contained concerns about consumables and recommended routine monitoring. Nothing more. Ethan frowned. That was not what he remembered. Nathan had been far more forceful. Ethan searched his own files. Eventually, he found an earlier attachment Nathan had sent before his dismissal. He opened both versions side by side. Entire paragraphs were missing from the executive copy. Nathan had specifically warned that the combination of altered consumables' inconsistent material behavior, shortened preheat cycles, and reduced ultrasonic inspection could create delayed cracking. The words were almost a description of what Harbor Crest was experiencing. Ethan sat motionless. Someone had changed the report. Back in North Carolina, Nathan knew nothing about the crisis. His mornings now began differently. At 7 sharp, Malcolm Hayes arrived at the workshop. Nathan taught him to clean metal properly before allowing him near an arc. Then came measuring, clamping, joint preparation, safety. Malcolm grew impatient. "When do I actually weld?" "When you stop asking when you get to weld." Malcolm rolled his eyes. Nathan saw it. "Want to go home?" "No, sir." "Then clean that plate again." Malcolm did. Days became weeks. The boy's hands became steadier. His attention improved. Nathan discovered something unexpected about teaching. To explain what he knew, he had to understand his own instincts. One afternoon, Malcolm struggled with a practice bead. "It keeps changing," he complained. "What keeps changing the puddle?" Nathan stepped beside him. "Because the plate is getting hotter. I'm doing the same thing." "That's your problem." Malcolm lifted his visor. Nathan pointed toward the steel. "Conditions changed." "You didn't." The words stopped Nathan. He had said nearly the same thing to Ethan. Suddenly, Harbor Crest felt very far away and very close. Malcolm adjusted his technique. The next bead improved. Nathan nodded. "That's better." Malcolm grinned. Nathan felt something he had not experienced since Margaret died. Useful. Not because a corporation needed his labor, because another human being needed what he knew. That evening, Nathan stood outside the workshop as Malcolm rode away. Sparks from the day's work had left familiar marks across the floor. For weeks after being fired, Nathan had believed Harbor Crest proved his experience had expired. Now he understood the opposite. Experience did not become worthless when a company stopped paying for it. Sometimes its greatest value appeared only when it was passed forward. In Norfolk, Ethan was still staring at Nathan's original report. He printed both versions. Then he carried them to Rebecca's office. She read the missing paragraphs slowly. Her face changed. "Where did you get this from my old project files?" Rebecca looked toward the closed door. "This means they were warned." Ethan nodded. And Nathan predicted the failure mechanism. Rebecca stared at the 2 reports. Outside, another alarm sounded from the testing bay. A 4th hull section had just failed inspection. For the first time, Ethan said aloud what several engineers were beginning to think. "We need Nathan Bailey." Rebecca looked at him. The answer was obvious. The only question was whether the man Harbor Crest had thrown away would ever agree to come back. Within 2 weeks, Harbor Crest Shipbuilding's problem could no longer be contained behind closed doors. Rumors spread through Norfolk's maritime community. A newly completed vessel had failed pressure testing, then another had required emergency structural repairs. Suppliers began asking questions. Customers demanded inspection records. Harbor Crest's largest client refused to accept another vessel until an independent review could prove the hulls were safe. Every delayed delivery cost money. Every day of idle dock time cost more. Then, a government subcontractor requested a formal explanation. That frightened the board more than anything else. Douglas Whitmore called an emergency meeting. Engineers, supervisors, quality control personnel, and corporate executives crowded into the conference room. On the screen behind Douglas were photographs of cracked welds. "We have replaced the consumables," he said. "We have recalibrated every robotic unit. We have verified steel certifications. Why are we still finding defects?" Nobody answered. Douglas looked toward Ethan Parker. Engineering Ethan had spent the previous night studying Nathan Bailey's original report. "We're treating each failure as an isolated variable." Douglas frowned. Meaning the wire isn't the whole problem. Neither is the steel. Neither are the robots. Then what is the combination? Ethan stood and approached the screen. Different material behavior roost, pre-heat time, rigid automated parameters, shorter inspections. Nathan warned us these factors could interact. The room became quiet. Douglas's jaw tightened. "We are not turning this into a discussion about a former employee." Rebecca Collins spoke from the opposite side of the table. "Maybe we should." Douglas looked at her. Rebecca opened a thick folder. She had spent 3 days examining archived inspection records from older Harbor Crest projects. "I reviewed 22 years of structural corrections." She placed several reports on the table. There were similar warning signs before. Not identical, but similar. Heat-affected cracking, distortion around thickness transitions, inconsistent consumable behavior. One executive leaned forward. Why didn't those vessels develop the same problems? Rebecca looked directly at Douglas. Because Nathan caught them. She showed them handwritten corrections, additional scan requests, modified preheat instructions, and repair recommendations carrying Nathan's signature. Year after year, he had quietly intervened before defects became failures. Nobody had noticed because nothing catastrophic happened. That was the cruel irony. Nathan's success had made his precautions look unnecessary. Harbor Crest had mistaken prevented disasters for evidence that the danger never existed. Douglas closed the folder. "We have qualified engineers," Ethan answered, "and one of them is telling you we need him." No. The word came immediately. Douglas would not call Nathan Bailey. Not after telling him machines did not grow old. Not after watching him leave with a cardboard box. Bringing Nathan back would mean admitting that Douglas had confused cost with value. The board members exchanged uneasy looks. That afternoon, another defect was discovered. By the end of the week, projected losses had climbed into millions. Still, Douglas refused. Ethan stopped waiting for permission. On Saturday morning, he drove south. The farther he traveled from Norfolk, the more the landscape changed. Shipyard cranes disappeared behind him. Highways narrowed into rural roads bordered by pine trees, fields, and stretches of dark water. He had only an address from Nathan's old employment records. Near noon, Ethan turned onto a gravel road. He expected to find a retired man living quietly. Instead, he heard welding. The old repair shed looked nothing like Ethan imagined. New roof panels covered most of the building. The doors stood open. Tools hung neatly inside. Nathan was beside a workbench with Malcolm Hayes. Malcolm wore protective equipment and concentrated on a practice plate. Nathan noticed Ethan first. His expression immediately hardened. "Stop," Nathan told Malcolm. The arc disappeared. Malcolm lifted his helmet. Ethan stepped from his car. "Hello, Nathan." Nathan removed his gloves. "You're a long way from Norfolk." "I know. Douglas send you no?" That answer surprised Nathan. Darius Coleman, working near his boat at the edge of the property, sensed the tension and quietly moved away. Ethan approached the workshop. "I owe you an apology." Nathan said nothing. "I didn't know they were using my documentation to eliminate your position. I told you I believed you. That doesn't mean I don't feel responsible." Nathan looked toward Malcolm. "Take 10 minutes." The teenager walked toward the dock. Nathan turned back. "What do you want?" Ethan struggled with the words. "Harbor Crest needs you." Nathan almost laughed. "No. You haven't heard what happened. I don't need to. 3 vessels have developed structural leaks. More sections are failing inspection." Nathan's expression changed slightly. Ethan continued. "The failures match your warning." Nathan looked towards the water. He had imagined vindication during sleepless nights after being fired. In those fantasies, Harbor Crest failed without him, and Douglas finally understood what he had thrown away. But hearing that it was actually happening brought no satisfaction, only concern. "Then follow my report. We found your original report." Nathan turned. Original Ethan removed papers from his bag. The version senior management reviewed was different. Nathan read both documents. Paragraphs were missing. Warnings had been softened. Recommendations had disappeared. His anger rose, but he controlled it. "Rebecca knows yes. Then she has enough to stop production. She's trying." Nathan handed the papers back. "You don't need me. We do. No, Ethan. You need someone you fired because he became inconvenient. That's different." Ethan absorbed the words. Nathan continued. "I gave that place 39 years. I warned them. They studied everything I knew, put it into a machine, then escorted me out like I was stealing something. I know. Do you?" Nathan pointed toward the workshop. "When I came here, I spent days wondering whether they were right, whether I had become an old man standing in the way." Ethan looked at Malcolm's practice welds. "You weren't. I know that now." There was no arrogance in Nathan's voice, only peace. Ethan realized Nathan had rebuilt something Harbor Crest could not offer him. Purpose. "I won't ask again," Ethan said. He turned toward his car. Then he stopped. "There's one thing you should know." Nathan waited. 1 vessel was delivered before the failures were understood. Nathan's eyes narrowed. "To whom?" "A regional ferry operator." The workshop seemed to become silent. "How many passengers?" "Depending on the route, several hundred a day." Nathan's anger vanished beneath something stronger. "Responsibility. Has it shown leakage?" "Not yet." "Has it been inspected using the revised protocol number?" Nathan looked toward the Albemarle Sound. He pictured families boarding, children standing near windows, crew members working below deck. People who would never know the name of the welder responsible for the steel surrounding them. Margaret's voice returned from years earlier. "You worry about strangers like their family. On the water they are." Nathan closed his eyes. Harbor Crest had betrayed him. Douglas had humiliated him. None of that belonged to the passengers. Malcolm approached slowly. "You going back?" Nathan looked at him. "I don't know." Malcolm glanced at Ethan. "They need you, don't." Nathan did not answer immediately. Then he looked at the workshop he and Margaret had once dreamed of restoring. He understood that returning to Norfolk did not have to mean surrendering the life he had begun building. He could help without becoming Harbor Crest's property again. Nathan faced Ethan. "I'm not coming back as an employee." Ethan nodded. "Understood. I'm not asking Douglas for my job. I wouldn't expect you to. And if Harbor Crest wants my help, things change." What things? Nathan looked toward Malcolm, then toward the tools lining the restored walls. He thought about Rebecca, about frightened inspectors, about younger workers being taught that speed mattered more than judgment, about a ferry carrying people who knew nothing about the decisions made inside corporate offices. Nathan's voice became firm. "Everything that should have changed before they fired me." For the first time since arriving, Ethan felt hope. Nathan picked up his old welding helmet. Harbor Crest had once summoned Nathan Bailey because it believed it owned his time. This time, if they wanted him back, they would have to come on his terms. Nathan Bailey did not return to Norfolk with Ethan Parker that afternoon. Instead, he sat alone inside the workshop after Malcolm Hayes and Darius Coleman had gone home. The old welding helmet rested on the workbench before him. For 39 years, Harbor Crest had decided when Nathan worked where he worked and how much his experience was worth. That relationship was over. If he returned now, it would not be because Douglas Whitmore had finally decided he was useful again. It would be because passengers might be in danger. Nathan took a notebook and began writing. The next morning, Ethan called Rebecca Collins. "He'll help." Rebecca released a breath. "Thank God. But he has conditions." "What conditions?" "Several." Nathan's first condition was simple. He would not be reinstated as a Harbor Crest employee. The company would contract directly with his North Carolina workshop as an independent technical consultant. His second condition was more important. Rebecca and her inspectors would regain complete authority to stop production whenever they identified a legitimate safety concern. No executive could override an inspection decision simply to protect a deadline. Third, no welder technician, engineer, or inspector could be disciplined for reporting a good-faith safety concern. The fourth condition surprised everyone. Harbor Crest would establish a paid apprenticeship program for young tradespeople. Nathan did not oppose automation. He opposed using technology as an excuse to destroy the path through which knowledge passed from one generation to another. Ethan delivered the conditions to Harbor Crest. Douglas rejected them almost immediately. "Absolutely not." Rebecca stood across from him. "Then find somebody else. We have hundreds of qualified people, and yet the ships are leaking." Douglas glared at her. The dispute reached the board within hours. Under normal circumstances, Nathan's demands might have been negotiated for weeks. These were not normal circumstances. The ferry operator had learned that vessels from the same production series were experiencing structural defects. Its attorneys demanded immediate assurances. If Harbor Crest could not provide them, the ferry would be removed from service, and legal action would follow. The board overruled Douglas. Nathan's conditions were accepted. 2 mornings later, Nathan drove north. As Norfolk appeared ahead, old emotions returned. He passed streets he had driven for decades. Then the cranes of Harbor Crest rose above the waterfront. Nathan tightened his hands around the steering wheel. His last departure from that place had been one of the most humiliating moments of his life. Now the security guard at the entrance checked a visitor authorization sheet and immediately opened the gate. "Good to see you again, Mr. Bailey." Nathan nodded. Inside Bay 4, news of his arrival traveled faster than any official announcement. Workers stopped. Some smiled. Others simply stared. Nathan walked through the same aisle he had crossed carrying his cardboard box months earlier. This time, Rebecca and several senior executives were waiting for him. Douglas stood behind them. Nathan did not look triumphant. He had not returned for revenge. He had returned because Steele did not care about pride. Rebecca handed him inspection files. "Where do you want to start the ferry?" Within an hour, Nathan, Ethan, and Rebecca were studying production records. Nathan requested material certificates, welding parameters, temperature logs, ultrasonic reports, consumable batch numbers, and repair histories. He compared them slowly. Ethan watched him. "You think the robots caused it?" Nathan shook his head. "No." Ethan looked surprised. "That's what everyone assumes. They're wrong." Nathan walked toward the automated cell. One robotic arm was operating on a test assembly. Its movement was smooth. Travel speed remained precise. Arc length stayed consistent. Nathan watched the finished seam. "That machine can weld better than a tired man on a long shift," he said. Rebecca folded her arms. "Then what happened? You asked it to follow instructions that stopped being correct." Nathan placed several production records side by side. The pattern emerged gradually. Harbor Crest had changed steel suppliers, then welding consumables, then reduced preheat times, then shortened inspections. Each decision alone had appeared defensible to management. Together, they created a dangerous system. Nathan focused on areas where thick structural plates transitioned into thinner sections. He pointed toward one drawing. Here. Ethan leaned closer. What the heat leaves these sections at different rates. Nathan pulled another failure report forward. And your rigid parameters treat both sides like they're behaving the same. Ethan studied the data. Residual stress. Nathan nodded. When the material cools unevenly, stress concentrates near the transition, Rebecca added. And if there's already porosity or incomplete fusion, you give the crack somewhere to begin. Nathan finished. The leaks suddenly stopped looking random. Every major failure clustered around combinations of thickness transition, shortened preheat, certain consumable batches, and reduced inspection. Ethan stared at the records. We kept searching for one cause. There wasn't one, Nathan said. He remembered trying to explain exactly this before his dismissal. A machine could repeat an instruction perfectly, but perfection meant nothing if the instruction failed to account for reality. Nathan developed a preliminary inspection sequence for the ferry. Every vulnerable transition would receive detailed ultrasonic examination. No abbreviated scans, no production assumptions. Rebecca immediately assigned her best technicians. Douglas entered the room while they were preparing. How long will this take? Rebecca looked at Nathan. Nathan answered, As long as it takes. We have customers waiting. Nathan met Douglas's eyes. And passengers waiting to find out whether your ships are safe. Douglas said nothing. For the first time, Nathan saw something unfamiliar in him. Not humility, fear. The investigation continued late into the evening. Then Rebecca found something strange. She was reviewing archived inspection records from the delivered ferry when she noticed two entries with identical timestamps. One showed a seam cleared without additional work. The second, stored in a backup directory, showed the same seam flagged for secondary examination. Ethan. He approached. Rebecca placed both records on the screen. That can't happen accidentally. Nathan joined them. Which version went into the final certification, the cleared one? Rebecca searched deeper. More discrepancies appeared. Several welds had originally been marked for additional inspection. Those warnings disappeared from the final production record. Nathan's expression darkened. Who changed them? Rebecca traced the authorization chain. The changes had passed through executive production control. Ethan looked at Nathan. This means someone knew there were concerns before the vessel left. Nathan felt anger rise inside him. Until that moment, he had believed Harbor Crest's disaster was caused primarily by arrogance and incompetence. That was bad enough. But altered inspection records suggested something else. Someone might have knowingly accepted uncertainty. Rebecca opened another archived file. There it was. A recommendation for expanded ultrasonic testing on 2 critical hull sections. Status deferred. Reason production schedule? Nathan stared at the words. For decades he had worried about mistakes because mistakes could happen to anyone. A missed defect was one thing. Choosing not to look for it was another. Douglas appeared in the doorway. What have you found? Nobody answered immediately. Nathan turned toward him. His voice was calm. Too calm. We found evidence that inspection concerns existed before the ferry was delivered. Douglas's face changed for only a fraction of a second. Nathan noticed. So did Rebecca. So did Ethan. Nathan stepped closer. You told everyone these leaks came without warning. Douglas straightened. That was the information available to me. Nathan looked toward the altered records. For 39 years, he had learned to recognize weakness hidden beneath perfect surfaces. Now he realized Harbor Crest might contain another kind of hidden fracture. And this one was not inside the steel. It was inside the people running the company. For several seconds, nobody inside the inspection office moved. Douglas Whitmore stood in the doorway while Nathan Bailey, Ethan Parker, and Rebecca Collins faced the evidence glowing on the computer screen. One inspection record said the ferry's weld had been cleared. The archived version said the same seam required additional examination. Nathan had spent his career studying fractures. He knew pressure did not create every weakness. Sometimes pressure merely revealed what was already there. "Who changed the record?" Nathan asked. Douglas looked toward Rebecca. "You're making assumptions." "I asked who changed it. I don't personally manage inspection files." Rebecca turned back to the computer. "But executive production control does." Douglas's face hardened. "Be very careful about what you're implying." Rebecca had spent months being careful. Careful when inspections were shortened. Careful when technicians were blamed. Careful when Nathan was dismissed. She was finished being careful. "I'm not implying anything," she said. "I'm checking." She opened the authorization history. The altered file had passed through the Office of Operations before final certification. That alone did not prove Douglas had personally ordered the change. Ethan knew where they needed to look next. Nathan's report. Douglas's eyes shifted toward him. Ethan noticed. So did Nathan. They returned to the original safety warning Nathan had submitted before his dismissal. The unedited document was blunt. Nathan had recommended expanded ultrasonic testing, revised preheat procedures, additional material verification, and possible rework of several hull sections. The executive version was dramatically softer. Nathan's strongest warnings had disappeared. Rebecca checked the metadata. The revised document had been generated after Nathan submitted the original. "Who approved this version?" Nathan asked. Rebecca followed the digital chain. A name appeared. Douglas Whitmore. Silence filled the office. Douglas stepped forward. "Reports are summarized for executive review all the time." Nathan stared at him. "You removed the recommendation to stop production. I approved a condensed version. You removed the warning about delayed cracking. The engineering team had not established that as a confirmed failure mechanism. I said it was a risk, and I had a contract worth millions of dollars depending on schedules." Nathan's expression changed. There it was. Not a denial, a justification. Rebecca looked stunned. "You knew." Douglas turned toward her. "I knew Nathan had concerns. That is not the same as knowing vessels would leak." Ethan felt anger replace disbelief. "You knew enough to order more testing," Douglas snapped. "And if executives stopped production every time an experienced employee imagined the worst possible outcome, nothing would ever leave this yard." Nathan remained strangely calm. "Why did you fire me?" Douglas did not answer. Nathan already understood. Keeping Nathan meant keeping someone who would continue objecting. Removing him removed resistance. Ethan suddenly remembered something. My emails. Months earlier, while documenting Nathan's procedures, Ethan had questioned several proposed inspection reductions. He had kept copies in a personal project archive. He opened his laptop. After several minutes, he found the chain. One message contained a recommendation from engineering that preheat requirements remain adjustable until the new materials were fully characterized. Douglas's reply was short. Standardize parameters. Production cannot absorb additional cycle time. Another email concerned inspection. Rebecca had requested full ultrasonic review around critical plate transitions. Douglas responded, "Use targeted inspection unless visible or measured conditions justify escalation." Ethan read the messages twice. "These are yours." Douglas looked toward the screen. "They're operational decisions." Rebecca answered. "They became safety decisions the moment warnings existed." Douglas's composure finally cracked. "You're all judging this with hindsight." Nathan shook his head. "No. I'm judging it with the report I wrote before the first ship leaked." The words ended the argument. Rebecca contacted the board's audit committee. Within hours, Harbor Crest opened an emergency internal investigation. Douglas was ordered to surrender direct control over production while records were preserved. As he left the office, he passed Nathan. Months earlier, Douglas had sat behind a table and told Nathan his position no longer existed. Now Douglas could not meet his eyes. Nathan felt no satisfaction. He had imagined this moment during angry nights in North Carolina. He had imagined vindication feeling warm. It did not. All he could think about was the ferry. "Let's repair the ships," he said. The following days became some of the most demanding Harbor Crest had experienced. Nathan worked beside welders young enough to be his grandchildren. Instead of simply issuing instructions, he explained the reason behind every step. Damaged sections were carefully removed. Material conditions were verified. Preheat temperatures were adjusted according to actual plate thickness and environment. Automated equipment remained part of the process. Nathan never suggested abandoning it. He showed Ethan how to make it better. "The machine isn't your enemy," Nathan told a group of welders. "Blind confidence is." The younger workers listened differently now. Before the failures, some had regarded Nathan as a relic from another era. Now they saw the connection between his instincts and the engineering data. He was not fighting progress. He was demanding that progress remain accountable. Malcolm Hayes visited Harbor Crest with Darius one afternoon. The teenager stopped inside Bay 4 and stared upward. The unfinished hull seemed enormous compared with Nathan's rural workshop. "You worked here 39 years?" Malcolm asked. Nathan nodded. Malcolm looked at the cranes, welding stations, and hundreds of workers, and they thought they didn't need you. Nathan smiled faintly. "Everybody gets things wrong." Even as he said it, Malcolm understood Nathan was talking about more than Harbor Crest. The first repaired vessel was prepared for pressure testing. Rebecca personally supervised the inspection. Water pressure increased inside the test compartments. Nathan stood with Ethan behind the monitoring station. Nobody spoke. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. Then 20. The repaired seams remained stable. No moisture appeared. Ultrasonic readings showed no developing defects. A technician finally looked toward Rebecca, pressure holding. Several workers exhaled at once. Ethan smiled. Malcolm nearly cheered. Nathan did neither. He walked toward the hull and placed one hand against the cool steel. This was only a controlled test. The ocean was different. Ships flexed, engines vibrated, waves imposed changing loads. Temperature shifted. Nathan had learned long ago that confidence had to be earned repeatedly. Ethan approached him. It held. "Here. You still don't trust?" Nathan looked toward the massive vessel. "I trust what we tested. And the repair, I'll trust that after the sea trial." Across the yard, investigators continued collecting files from Douglas's office. The board had already discovered enough to confirm that safety warnings had been suppressed to protect schedules and quarterly performance. Douglas attempted to shift responsibility toward an operations vice president, but Ethan's saved emails tied several critical decisions directly to him. The truth was becoming impossible to bury. Nathan watched workers prepare the repaired vessel for its final trial. He realized justice was not Douglas losing his office. Justice was every passenger boarding a Harbor Crest vessel without knowing how close corporate arrogance had come to reaching them. The next test would happen where excuses meant nothing. Open water. Nathan picked up his helmet and looked toward Ethan. "When does she sail tomorrow morning?" Nathan nodded. "Then I'm going with her." For 39 years, Nathan Bailey had trusted his work to travel beyond the horizon without him. Tomorrow, for the first time, he would stand aboard one of those vessels, while the ocean itself decided whether they had finally made things right. Before sunrise the following morning, Nathan Bailey stood on the dock beside the repaired vessel. The sky above Norfolk was pale gray, and a cold wind moved across the Elizabeth River. Technicians carried equipment aboard, while Rebecca Collins reviewed the final inspection checklist. Ethan Parker stood near the gangway speaking with the engineering team. Nathan remained silent. He had watched hundreds of vessels leave Harbor Crest during his 39 years there. Some had sailed into the Atlantic, some had traveled along the coast. Others had carried crews through storms Nathan would never witness. Yet Nathan had rarely traveled aboard them. His responsibility had always ended at the dock. Or so he once believed. Every time a ship disappeared beyond the horizon, pieces of his work traveled with it. Today would be different. Today Nathan would travel with the steel. Ethan approached him. "You ready?" Nathan looked at the vessel. "We'll find out." They boarded. Shortly after 7, the engines started. A deep vibration traveled through the deck beneath Nathan's boots. The vessel slowly separated from the pier. Nathan looked back toward Harbor Crest. The cranes grew smaller. Months earlier, he had driven away from those same cranes, believing 39 years of his life had been reduced to nothing more than a severance payment. Now the company's future depended partly on whether the repairs he had designed could withstand open water. But Nathan did not think about vindication. He thought about passengers. If Harbor Crest declared these vessels safe again, families and crews would trust that decision without ever knowing what had happened inside the shipyard. That trust mattered more than Douglas Whitmore. The vessel entered rougher water. The captain increased speed. Engine vibration intensified. Technicians monitored strain gauges positioned near repaired hull sections. Rebecca moved between stations, checking readings. Nathan and Ethan descended into a lower compartment. Everything was dry. "Ballast change in 2 minutes," Ethan said. Nathan nodded. Water shifted between tanks. The vessel's load distribution changed. Steel flexed beneath forces invisible to anyone standing on deck. Nathan crouched beside one repaired transition joint. His hand rested against the painted surface. Ethan watched him. "You can't feel a microscopic crack?" "No." "Then what are you doing listening?" Ethan smiled slightly. "To steel to everything." The maneuver ended. No moisture appeared. The vessel turned into heavier waves. Its bow rose and dropped. Nathan held a railing while the hull responded to each impact. This was what no factory test could completely reproduce. Movement, repeated loading, vibration, unpredictability. After another inspection, Rebecca entered the compartment. Still dry. Nathan checked his watch. "Keep going?" For nearly 4 hours, the crew pushed the vessel through the full trial program. High-speed turns, ballast changes, repeated acceleration and deceleration, engine load variation. Every repaired compartment was inspected again and again. Nothing leaked. Near noon, the vessel entered calmer water. Ethan leaned against a bulkhead. "I think we did it." Nathan looked at the dry Seine. Ethan laughed quietly. "Yes, we." Nathan allowed himself a small smile. "Then maybe we did." When the vessel returned to Harbor Crest, dozens of employees waited near the dock. Rebecca stepped ashore first. A board representative approached her. "Well," Rebecca looked back toward Nathan. "Dry." The word traveled through the crowd. Workers applauded. Nathan descended the gangway last. He did not raise his hands or celebrate. He simply looked at the people around him and felt something inside finally settle. But one successful vessel was not enough. Nathan's revised inspection protocol was immediately applied to every unfinished hull in the series. Additional defects were discovered. Some were small. Others could eventually have become serious. Every affected section was repaired before delivery. The process cost Harbor Crest millions of dollars. Yet everyone understood what the alternative might have cost. Not money, lives. The board ordered a complete review of production practices. Inspection authority was permanently restored to Rebecca's department. Workers were formally protected when reporting safety concerns. Production schedules were rewritten. Automation remained, but the philosophy surrounding it changed. Machines would support skilled workers rather than replace judgment. Meanwhile, the investigation into Douglas accelerated. Internal records confirmed that he had approved changes that softened Nathan's safety report and shortened inspection procedures. Douglas insisted he had been protecting Harbor Crest from unnecessary delays. The board disagreed. He was removed from his position. Civil investigators later began reviewing whether production records connected to the defective vessels had been improperly altered. Nathan heard the news while working beside Ethan. Ethan expected a reaction. Nathan merely nodded. "That's it. What do you want me to do?" "I don't know. Enjoy it." Nathan shook his head. A man losing his career doesn't repair 1 inch of steel. Ethan understood. Nathan had wanted accountability, not revenge. Several days later, Nathan was invited into the executive conference room. The atmosphere was completely different from the HR meeting where he had been dismissed. This time, board members stood when he entered. One of them slid a folder across the table. "We would like you to return permanently." Nathan opened it. The salary was substantially higher than anything Harbor Crest had paid him before. His title would be Senior Director of Welding Integrity. He would have authority over technical standards and training. A year earlier, the offer would have represented everything Nathan believed he wanted: recognition, security, respect. Now he closed the folder. No. The executives exchanged surprised looks. Ethan, standing near the wall, smiled. A board member asked, "May we ask why Nathan thought about the quiet property in North Carolina? The restored roof, Darius arriving with impossible repairs, Malcolm showing up before 7, Margaret's photograph beside the window." "For 39 years, this place was my life," Nathan said. "Then I thought losing it meant losing myself." He paused. "I was wrong." Nathan explained that he would continue helping Harbor Crest under the independent consulting agreement. He would review procedures, train teams, support Rebecca and Ethan, but he would not return permanently. "I have work waiting somewhere else." The board accepted his decision. More importantly, it approved the apprenticeship program Nathan had demanded. Young people would receive paid training in welding inspection fabrication and automated systems while learning directly from experienced tradespeople. When Nathan returned to North Carolina, Malcolm was waiting outside the workshop. "How did the test go?" Nathan climbed from his truck. "Dry." Malcolm grinned. "So you saved Harbor Crest?" Nathan shook his head. "No. A lot of people fixed what should never have been ignored." Malcolm considered that. "Are you going back there?" "Sometimes." "For good." Nathan looked at the old workshop. Sunlight reflected from the repaired windows. A new section of dock stretched over the water. His second welding helmet rested beside Malcolm's on the workbench. "No." Malcolm seemed relieved. Nathan walked inside. He noticed a practice weld Malcolm had completed while he was gone. Nathan examined it carefully. Malcolm waited nervously. Well, Nathan pointed toward one section. "Too much heat here." Malcolm groaned. Nathan almost laughed. But better. That single word changed the teenager's expression. Nathan placed the piece back on the table. Outside evening light spread across the Albemarle Sound. Harbor Crest had offered Nathan his old world back with more money and a better title. He had declined because he finally understood something. The greatest victory was not forcing the people who rejected him to admit they had been wrong. It was reaching the point where he no longer needed their approval to know his own worth. Nathan looked around the workshop Margaret had once imagined as their retirement refuge. It was becoming something neither of them had predicted, and soon it would belong to more than Nathan Bailey. 1 year later, the abandoned repair shed beside the Albemarle Sound no longer looked abandoned. The leaking roof had been replaced. The broken windows were gone. Fresh electrical lines ran along reinforced walls feeding modern welding stations and inspection equipment. The crooked dock had been rebuilt, and a modest sign stood beside the gravel entrance. Bailey Marine Skills Workshop. Nathan Bailey arrived before sunrise most mornings. Some habits he had discovered were worth keeping. At 68, he still made black coffee before dawn. He still checked equipment before anyone else arrived. He still believed a clean workbench revealed something about the person using it. But Nathan no longer drove through Norfolk toward Harbor Crest every morning. Now he walked 50 yards from his small house to a workshop that belonged to him. More importantly, its purpose belonged to something larger than him. What began with Darius Coleman's cracked propeller bracket had gradually become a training center for young people throughout the surrounding communities. Some students came from families that could not afford college. Others had struggled academically. A few simply wanted to work with their hands. Nathan did not care where they started. He cared whether they arrived on time. Malcolm Hayes always did. The 17-year-old who once watched Nathan from outside the workshop was now 18 and completing his first professional certification. His transformation had not happened overnight. There had been mistakes, arguments, burned practice plates, days when Malcolm became frustrated and wanted to quit. Nathan never lowered the standard. He simply refused to let failure become the boy's identity. On the morning Malcolm received confirmation that he had passed his certification examination, he read the email 3 times. Nathan was repairing a fixture nearby. "I passed." Nathan continued working. "Nathan, I heard you." "I passed." Nathan finally looked up. Malcolm was smiling so broadly that Nathan could no longer pretend indifference. "I told you that you could." "No, you didn't." Nathan frowned. "I didn't. You told me I could if I stopped rushing." Nathan considered it. "That sounds more like me." Malcolm laughed. Then Nathan extended his hand. Malcolm looked at it before pulling Nathan into an unexpected embrace. Nathan stiffened. For a moment he did not know what to do. Then he placed one hand against the young man's back. "Well done," he said quietly. Malcolm heard something deeper in those 2 words. Nathan had given him more than a trade. He had given him evidence that his future did not have to be determined by his past. The workshop continued growing. Harbor Crest helped fund several pieces of equipment through the apprenticeship agreement Nathan had demanded. Nathan accepted the support, but refused to let the facility become a corporate training branch. Bailey Marine Skills Workshop remained independent. That mattered to him. Ethan Parker visited twice each month. He taught automated welding systems, digital monitoring, robotic programming, and modern production techniques. Nathan taught metallurgy inspection preparation and judgment. Their classes became popular precisely because the 2 men did not always agree. One afternoon, Ethan demonstrated how a robotic arm could reproduce a weld with remarkable consistency. Nathan watched the students admire it. Then he placed 2 steel plates of slightly different thicknesses on the table. "What changes?" he asked. A student answered heat distribution. Another added cooling rate. Malcolm said residual stress. Nathan nodded. "And what happens if your machine doesn't know conditions changed?" The students understood. Ethan smiled. It was the same lesson Nathan had once taught him. Technology was not the enemy. Arrogance was. Back in Norfolk Harbor, Crest changed too. The recovery was slow and expensive. Every vessel connected to the defective production period underwent extensive review. No catastrophic accident occurred. The ferry that had frightened Nathan most remained in service after passing repeated inspections. Rebecca Collins was promoted to head of quality assurance. Under her leadership, inspectors received authority that could not be overridden simply because a delivery date was approaching. A plaque appeared inside Harbor Crest's main inspection department. Its message contained only 7 words. "No deadline outranks a human life." Rebecca had suggested it. Nathan never asked for his name beneath it. He did not need one. Douglas Whitmore never returned to Harbor Crest. The investigation into altered production records followed him long after his office had been emptied. Nathan occasionally heard updates. He never asked for more. Justice, he had learned, was not watching another man suffer. Justice was seeing the system that allowed harm to change. Nathan continued consulting for Harbor Crest several days each month. Whenever he returned, younger, welders greeted him differently. Not as a relic. Not as the man who had defeated automation. As a teacher. One afternoon, Nathan passed the location where his old locker had stood. For a moment he remembered the cardboard box, the photograph, the disabled badge, the humiliation of walking through Bay 4 while people avoided his eyes. That memory no longer hurt in the same way. Harbor Crest had taken his job. It had accidentally returned his life. Late that autumn, the anniversary of Margaret's death arrived. Nathan finished teaching early. He walked alone toward the restored dock behind the workshop. The water was calm. Autumn light stretched across the Albemarle Sound. Nathan carried Margaret's old photograph. He sat near the end of the dock and looked at it. "You were right," he whispered. Margaret had once imagined this place filled with quiet mornings. She had imagined coffee beside the water. She had imagined Nathan finally learning that life existed beyond Harbor Crest. The dream had come true, just not in the way either of them expected. Nathan felt the familiar ache of missing her. Grief had not disappeared. It had simply learned to live beside gratitude. Footsteps sounded behind him. Malcolm approached, but stopped several feet away. "Sorry, I can come back." Nathan shook his head. "What is it?" "We've got a problem." Nathan almost smiled. "What kind?" "The good kind." Malcolm pointed towards the workshop. 3 new students showed up early. Nathan looked toward the building. Through the open doors he could see young people waiting beside the workbenches. One appeared nervous. Another was examining the equipment. Ethan had arrived early as well and was preparing the automated station. Nathan slowly stood. For a moment he remained beside the water. Then he looked at Margaret's photograph one final time before placing it carefully inside his jacket. "Come on," he told Malcolm. They walked back together. As Nathan approached the workshop, welding sparks suddenly illuminated the interior. He stopped. 39 years. That was what Harbor Crest had once reduced to a labor expense. 39 years of burns, mistakes, night shifts, lessons, judgment, sacrifice. 39 years of knowledge that executives believed could be extracted, standardized, and stored inside machines. They had misunderstood its true value. Nathan's experience was not valuable because only he possessed it. Its greatest value appeared when he passed it on. Malcolm opened the workshop door. The students turned toward Nathan. "Mr. Bailey," one asked nervously. "Yes. We were told you could teach us." Nathan looked around the room. He saw his old welding helmet hanging beside Malcolm's. He saw modern equipment Ethan had helped install. He saw the workbench Nathan had repaired during those lonely first weeks after leaving Norfolk. And suddenly he understood exactly what Margaret had seen years earlier when she first stood on this neglected property. Not broken boards, possibility. Nathan picked up a broom and handed it to the nearest student. The young man looked confused. Malcolm began laughing. Nathan smiled. "We don't start with welding." Outside, the sun lowered across the water. Inside, another generation began learning. Nathan Bailey had once believed being replaced meant he had reached the end of his usefulness. Instead, rejection had forced him to discover that a person's worth was never determined by whether a company still recognized it. Experience could be ignored. Integrity could be punished. Loyalty could be forgotten. But purpose could be rebuilt. Sometimes the door that closed after a lifetime of service was not the end of the road. Sometimes it was the first door leading home.